The Ohio State Buckeyes are back in action this weekend in Columbus, Ohio, taking on the Marshall Thundering Herd in a game that they need, in a game that is the last one before Big Ten play, and one that Ohio State will finish this first section of their season. We'll get you set for Ohio State versus Marshall on this episode of the Buckeye Breakdown podcast.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
And welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. Really appreciate you jumping in with us here tonight. As we get you set, we set the table for the Ohio State Buckeyes taking on the Marshall Thundering Herd. And this episode here tonight is going to be just that. We're going to take a look at the Marshall offense versus the Ohio State defense against the Marshall offense. And yes, this is a lopsided, one-sided matchup for sure, as the first two games have been, but equally important for Ohio State to show up. My partner, Kevin Weike, we'll bring you in here and talk about, just in general terms, what it's like coming off of a bye week like Ohio State had, knowing that on the other side, it's not a marquee matchup, but one you just know you can't stub your toe on.
Absolutely. I mean, coming off a bye week, you always have a little bit more pep in your step. You're always, usually because it's like halfway through the season, not two games in. You usually fix some of those things that were nagging for a few weeks in terms of injuries, soft tissue, whatever it be. It's hard to get up for this kind of game. But I think if anything showed from Notre Dame playing them last year, might have been the year before, one of the two. I mean, they were just like NIU. It was a game that they thought was going to be a cakewalk, and it wasn't. And they ended up losing the game at the end. So that's where, you got to make sure that you can maybe have a slow start, but you need to make sure you finish properly.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? This week two bye week is not normal. This isn't a normal thing, but for Ohio State, it's pretty nice because they also get a bye week coming in the middle of October. So now you're in this like middle stretch. If you cut the season into thirds, right? You take your first third, and I'd say that was a good success. You probably would have one quarter, that first quarter against Akron back, but other than that, you were pretty sharp. And now you enter into this second quarter of the season where it's going to feature some big games, right? You got Oregon coming on in a couple weeks here. You got Michigan State next week, and all of those things are those that's like, if you're looking ahead, you're doing the wrong things, and that's when those upsets come into play. When teams are they take a team lightly. This team doesn't feel that way, Kevin, and it's been evident, throughout the way the way they approached weeks 1 and 2 by not only their play, but the things that they have said outside of the football field, where they're talking about, hey, their minds are set on a larger goal. And obviously a lot of that does become that like football talk, that coach speaky feel, but it feels really real when these guys are talking about it. The Jack Sawyers, the Denzel Burks, all these guys are talking about, hey, our goal isn't to just be good early in the season. Our goal is much bigger than this. And we're locked in on not only the opponent at hand, but continuing to get better and improve against ourselves week by week.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, it takes these kind of games to get right. And Ohio State has been lucky enough to have a start to the schedule like they did. It let someone like Donovan, who maybe had some injuries and maybe had some ailments, like, get healthy before they really hit. Michigan State's isn't an easy game. It never is. I mean, we call it one rivalry game, but like Michigan State and Penn State, I mean, there's no love lost, that's for sure. And that's just how it is. And I think that's what they have probably been prepping at a little bit as they went through the bye week. They're probably watching some Michigan State film. They're like, hey, we're going to watch some Marshall stuff. We're going to make sure we dot our I's, cross our T's. But the bigger picture is that Big Ten play. And that's where their heads are most likely at. And it could result to a slow start to the game, but I think they'll lock in pretty quickly in the event that happens.
Yeah, and I think evident across college football last week is just how the balance of power starting to come to be thanks to the NIL stuff. Like mostly people talk about the NIL situation as pretty negative, but one of the positives from it is you get a lot of these guys on rosters. Think back to the Georgia-Kentucky game on Saturday night, where you get a lot of these guys on rosters who were at the big school. They were at Georgia. They were at Ohio State. In our case today, we'll talk about a couple guys who came from Michigan State, talk about a guy who came from Louisville, who've had these big game experiences and these big team experiences. They may have gotten injured or they got passed up or whatever the case is for the reason they transfer. But these are still legit dudes. And whether it be Marshall or whether it be Michigan State, the balance of power is starting to level out where it used to be. And obviously, Georgia's still one of the better teams in the country. But maybe they're not the end-all be-all that they have been in the past couple of years. And I think that part is really cool, especially as we get into Big Ten play in next week. But when you're finishing up here, even in these 3 bye games that Ohio State's in, it feels like it's been a little bit of a progression, right? Akron, not so good, right? It's not a good program. The program's not in a good spot. Western Michigan, a little bit better. They take Wisconsin to the brink. They're on a better path. You take care of business there. Marshall feels like maybe on that same level as Western Michigan, but potentially a little bit up. They took on Virginia Tech last week, who they're a little down after a loss to Vanderbilt a couple weeks back, but still gave them a little bit of a game, 31-14 loss. And it's just enough to get your attention to, hey, we're keeping this increase, we're going to continue to increase based on our opponents and continue to get better there. So that's got to be really the approach as they take the field inside the horseshoe on Saturday.
Absolutely. You said it really well. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, you got to look at it as each time you get on the field, it's going to be somebody better. That's how they try and stack these games up. And that's just that's what's coming down the pipe, and you got to get ready to address it. And if they don't take steps forward after a bye week like that and really hone in on some of those issues, then it's going to be a different type of conversation.
Yeah, and it was a fun start to the week here. So getting more into Marshall, everyone's heard it by now. It happened a couple days ago, but an awesome back and forth between Marshall head coach Charlie Huff and head coach Ryan Day, where Huff got to the podium on whatever day it was, maybe even Tuesday at the start of their work week, and he had made a comment about how he would welcome all the Ohio State guys with open arms, and then he offered up an NIL deal with $2 biscuits. Must be a West Virginia delicacy, right? Where he offered up for Ohio State guys to have unlimited biscuits across the way if they were to come and join the Marshall Thundering Herd. And to Coach Day's credit, he popped in and was like, yeah, sometimes we take ourselves too seriously as coaches, as players in this whole world. You get so locked in, and coaches will like pin that on the bulletin board and be like, these coaches are talking down on you or want you or whatever. But Coach Day was like, yeah, that was pretty funny. That was good. He goes, we're not going to let our guys go do that, but it was still pretty funny. I thought that was a cool little back and forth between the two head coaches as the week got kicked off.
Absolutely. And you kind of got to have fun with it now. I mean, college football's changing so much. I mean, yeah, you got to have fun with it. There's so much seriousness. There's so much people up in the air, people going every which way. Some teams have benefited from it, some haven't. So, I mean, the only thing you can do is really just laugh about it and have some fun with it.
And move it right along. And for Marshall, talking more specifically about football, they're going to come into Saturday with a 1-1 record. In week 1, they took on Stony Brook, who obviously is a step down in competition, and just straight rolled them, right? 145-3. Wasn't ever close in just pure domination. And then they come back next week in a game that they went to Blacksburg to take on the Virginia Tech Hokies. And they fell 31-14 in that game. But one of the things when Marshall has the football, Kevin, is the big play. And Coach Day talked about that in throughout the week here, is that these guys, they have a couple guys on their offense that have the ability that if you're not sound and you miss a tackle, it could be curtains and it could be good night. And that's something that is on the minds of the Ohio State defenders, is to prevent against the big play, especially on the ground.
And that's where A.J. Turner comes in. I mean, he's got 222 yards through 2 games on only 14 carries. I mean, granted, one was a 70-yard carry, one was an 80-yard carry, but he can make you pay. I mean, he gets out there in space. I mean, I watched both highlights, and he's not a bad runner. He's evidently good, and I mean, he catches a few balls in space. It's just you got to make sure that you keep those kind of guys in check because they can really wreck a game if they have a couple big plays here and there to keep them in it, as opposed to putting that thumb down 28-0. 28-0 and 35-0 are two very different positions on the sideline. And if you let these guys go 28-7, 28-14, and they keep that fighting them, it's going to be a much longer game than it has to be.
Yeah, and that goes even back to last week. They go into halftime down 10-7 against Virginia Tech, and even they go into the fourth quarter down 24-14. So they feel like they're in the football game. This wasn't one where, hey, Virginia Tech got up 31-0 and they pulled the dogs off. Like, no, they went into halftime competing. And this team, you know, their first win of the season, you know, obviously was a blowout, but it doesn't matter. They've learned how to win, and they've had that week of, hey, this felt good. And then they go to Virginia Tech, and yes, Virginia Tech's not on the level that Ohio State is, but they still are, you know, a Division I program. Going to Blacksburg's never easy. They were probably playing Sandman. It was probably jumping and going crazy. Probably a great environment that these guys are now used to. And similar to your point at the start of the show when you had brought up the Marshall beating Notre Dame a couple years back, and how anytime teams go to Notre Dame, the coach or some of the guys were talking about it when they got upset. But like anytime people go to Notre Dame, there's this level of, hey, we have an opportunity to upset the Irish at their home, you know, at Notre Dame Stadium in one of the most historic stadiums in all of college football. Similar story when teams come to Columbus. Like they have an opportunity, and you see it sometimes early on in these games, but they have an opportunity to be heroes, be legends if they can put 60 minutes together. And they're gonna pull all the stops, and they're gonna give you your best effort. And you saw that last week with this group, and you're probably gonna get their best effort on Saturday afternoon. The signal caller for the Marshall Thundering Herd is Stone Earl, 6 foot 211. He's a redshirt senior. He's transferred a little bit, spent some time at North Texas. So he went from this shade of green is very rare. He got them both. He got both colleges that are with this. But he went from North Texas as a Green Wave, never really played, and then came up to Marshall. And he's going to be a mix. He's going to throw it a little bit, and will be successful doing so. But he'll also run the football. He actually leads the team in rushing attempt with 18, and is a little bit behind with just over 100 yards on the ground. So, Kevin, when you have a guy who's a dual threat quarterback like Stone is, what kind of challenge does that pose to a defense? You know, obviously you have to be disciplined, but when a guy can run it and throw it, you know, that does present a certain challenge when the Buckeyes are on defense.
100%. I mean, look at Trace McSorley a few years back for Penn State.
Similar guy, yeah, not going to run past you, but he can get it done with his legs.
He's quick, and then that's just what it is. And you got to play it a little bit. You got to make sure you're not lax. You got to stay home if you're supposed to stay home. If you have contain, you got to have contain. You just got to play sound football. When you're going up against someone that can burn you, get you 4 yards here and there, 5 yards when maybe you stop him on first down, 2nd and 10, they run a read option, he gets 5 yards. Different type of play is called. It's a lot easier for them to get that first down. That's where you just got to make sure you stay home, you do what you're supposed to do and everything. And I mean, Stone Earl does that. He's played for 2 of the 12 teams that don't have an S in their mascot. I mean, that's impressive. I don't think many people can say that. But that's where he tends to burn you. His arm's not going to burn you. He's not like Chad Pennington, whose son Cole is on the team as well. It's more a little tidbit fact there, but it's more in his legs and his ability to make plays.
Yeah, and that's a guy, like you said, it's just something to be disciplined about. And one thing I want to get your opinion on, Kevin, and this is just talking about Ohio State's defense as a whole to this point. Yes, they pitched a shutout, and yes, they gave up 6 points to Akron, but two things kind of come to mind, especially when you're playing teams of a little bit lower of a caliber. You're not in your weight class, if you will. But Western put a drive together. They did miss a field goal, but they did kind of march up the field in their second drive of the game. And then Akron, in the first half of that game a couple weeks back, played okay. They moved the ball a little bit. They were able to get some points on the board, but they did kind of move it. And Jim Knowles has been very open about this being a bend, don't break kind of a defense. So when teams do move the football, they will. And then really when you start getting into that high red zone area, they really just turn the water off and they tighten down and they make a couple plays here and there to make it really tough to turn what could be 7 points into 3 points. Now, it doesn't really rear its head in games like this, but as the season goes on and you run up against an Oregon, you run up against the Michigan or whoever it may be, that can get really important. So from a former player's perspective and maybe from an offensive lineman's perspective, what does that do when you put drives together to the psyche of the offense? You put drives together, but you struggle to punch it in against a defense that really gets real stout when it comes to crunch time down in that red zone area of the field.
It's heartbreaking is probably the way to put it. It's exhausting. I mean, you said it. It's a bend, don't break defense. And honestly, that if there's one point I'm going to make today about our defense, I'm a little disappointed that they're bending against these teams. Granted, it's only been the first half or the first drive, but you shouldn't be bending against these teams. If you're bending against Western Michigan and Marshall, you're breaking against Oregon. I mean, Oregon isn't what they usually – they haven't had the start of the season everyone thought they would. But bending against these teams will break later in the season, and that's what I'm worried about. And that's what I want to see them start out and don't bend, just be a brick wall when this Thundering Herd gets out there on offense.
Yeah. And we saw it. It was better against Western, right? They did they were a little bit better, but there was still that element of moving the football around the field. But I think to your point, this defense is good enough. It's talented enough, and it's expensive enough that, hey, you got to hold them to this high standard of, hey, let's put a statement out there today. Let's not let this team cross the 50. There's going to be standards and goals that they have internally that, hey, not only do we want to shut this team out, but we want to keep them to a certain yardage or certain, keep them out of a certain area of the field. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'm excited to see how this defense continues to grow because it is so good. All right, flipping over to the other side of the football. The Ohio State offense, outside of one quarter, maybe a quarter and a half, has been operating pretty smooth. It was really impressive what they did against Western Michigan from start to finish, right from the gun to the final whistle. That offense was humming, and it was playing at a pretty efficient pace, which was exciting to see. Will Howard took a step forward. We documented it so well how well improved or how much improved the Ohio State offensive line played. And then when the offensive line improves itself, the running backs really benefit from that in a big way. And they did that. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins both had their kind of coming out parties in the 2024 season. So when Ohio State's offense is on the field, coming off of a bye week and really looking to just continue to improve, what are you looking for this week specifically? Maybe it's on the offensive line, maybe it's in the backfield, maybe it's at the quarterback or wide receiver positions, but what's something that's going to be on your mind when that Buckeyes offense is on the field?
I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks. I'd love to see them get the tight ends a little bit more involved in the passing game. And I'd love to see, and maybe they're not showing it on purpose, but getting Travion and
Quinshon.
Getting Travion and Gerard, sorry, I'm blanking on his name, Judkins. Couldn't think of his first name. In the game at the same time, I think would be really beneficial. And even run a wildcat with both of them and run a speed option. Like, who knows? I think it can be very creative with these two guys that are both top tier, top five, might not even be 4 or 5 in the country at running back. Like, that's just what we're looking at here. And I mean, like, that's something I'm really excited to see, and hopefully it shows out throughout the remainder of the season. Maybe we look back on this week 12 and be like, oh, I looked like such an idiot talking at Marshall because it showed up 2 weeks later against Oregon. Who knows? But I think that's what I'm excited to see, and that's something I'd love to see. Maybe not this week, but definitely going forward, being a little more creative. Chip Kelly was known to be this creative offensive mastermind. Show me a little bit more of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. And we talked about that on Sunday or Saturday of last week when we were breaking down that Western tape. It was like, hey, you did bring up a really great point. It's like there's opportunities here. Yeah, Ohio State can be pretty vanilla and go out and beat most teams in the country. But when you start playing on the margins here and we start talking about games potentially in the end of the season where you're lining up against a Texas, or you're lining up against a Tennessee, or a Georgia, an Alabama. You're going to have to be pretty creative. And I'm sure, to your point though, I'm sure that they've got something working, but maybe we get a glimpse of it this week. Maybe we don't. Maybe they hold on to it for a week longer. But getting those two guys on the field at once, I think is going to be pretty good. For me, it's continue just a clean play from Will Howard. Obviously, it starts and ends with the quarterback, and he's been very good. I think he's done what you wanted him to do to this point. Now, this is going to be, again, another test up, right? This isn't Western. This isn't Akron. It's going to be another step up. And then this gradual path of getting to be better opponents. I want to see him continue to be very sharp. And I thought he was really sharp against Western Michigan, but I still think that there's room to grow. Maybe get a little bit more accurate in the deep ball. We look at the one clip last week where missed a deep shot, and again, it's not going to come back to bite you on Saturday, but down the road, that's going to start to pay dividends. So I really want to see him continue to improve, and for me as well, just see this offensive line continue to mesh, right? And I think this group has the potential to be very good. I think that they've heard the noise the past year and a half about how that's the group that's letting this team down. And I think last week was a really good step in the right direction. I think there's a lot of room to continue to grow, but I'm excited to see how that group continues to improve itself and get better.
Yeah, and that's where it comes in. Like Ohio State's a national program. Ohio State's PNC Bank. It's not Fifth Third. It's not regional. It's national. You need a national offensive line. They should be competing every year in the top 3 for the Joe Moore Award. I mean, that's just what it should be. And I mean, that's where it comes into play. Like, okay, like I get that we don't have the full starting line, but you guys are working, you guys are meshing. I need to see that. Keep improving, keep going in the right direction. I do not want to see it step back because I don't think it will, but that's just something I want to see.
Yeah, I think it's really good. Continue to build that momentum. We got some great momentum last week. We saw some stuff. You pointed out a bunch of great stuff that this group was doing that was better even from when they played Akron. And dude, I think that we can take a second here to talk about the importance of Seth McLaughlin up front. Just the rock that he's been at center is something that I think it hasn't gone understated. I think people have recognized it and at least spoken about it. But how important he has been to that group starting to really mesh. Like when you're center, he's calling the shots, he's identifying the defense, he's that leader of that group. And Coach Day even talked about it too. He's not only the leader of the group, but he's a steady hand in that group when things are potentially getting out of whack and coaches are yelling and screaming and they may have put a couple bad drives together. He's the guy that entire group leans on because he's been there. He's been at the highest stage of college football. He's been in the most intense moments. And I think that part, that element of this offensive line is something that I don't think fans are understating, but it's something that I just love to see from this group, is having that dude in the middle who just runs the show, and everything goes through him.
Yeah, I mean, we had Josh Myers when I was there. Before him, we had Pat Elflein, we had Billy Price. Those guys were anchors. Those guys were guys you could lean on. They were guys you could call on a Saturday night, like, hey, I need you to pick me up. They're there. They're that kind of guy. And I think Seth is that guy. And Seth came from a program where he was thrown through the ringer. I mean, a Nick Saban program, some of the most ruthless stuff that is the hardest coaching you're going to get outside of an Urban Meyer program, or you just don't see that coaching anymore. And it's definitely helpful to have Seth there that's been through that hard coaching, that can step up and be like, hey guys, here's what he's saying, here's how to interpret it, here's that. And we touched on that on Saturday's show, but yeah, that's something just to look at.
So important, and I think it's been awesome. So when Ohio State's offense is on the field, let's keep it clean too. No turnovers, no penalties, or limit the penalties. No turnovers at all. Keep the football in our hands. And I think we'll come back on Saturday night, getting ready for Big Ten play, feeling pretty good about where this Buckeyes team is heading into that. So Kevin, I'm putting on your spot. We didn't talk about this. Ohio State 40-point favorites, over/unders 52.5. You're not going to be available Saturday morning, so I need to get your pick. And I am putting you on the spot. Our fans are not going to believe what I'm saying here, but What do you think? Does Ohio State cover the 40? Does that total go over or under? What are your thoughts?
Personally, I think we're covering and hitting the over without giving up a point.
Ooh.
I think we're going to rip. We might be in the 60 cap. Seeing what Tennessee did last week, it's definitely within a reach. And I think that I hope, and what I'm watching is that we are on the same caliber as Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Granted, the team they played, Ohio team, so love them, but isn't really the best team in the country. Yeah. Arguably one of the worst in the MAC. But it's just, you got to start to show that you are the big stick. Like you swing the biggest stick, and you got to do it. I mean, Marshall's not a bad program. Like, they've had good players in the past. Like Cleveland, great. John Spellacy, Hall of Famer at Marshall, great linebacker. Like, they have great players, but this year's team on the defensive side of the ball doesn't have that standout guy. They don't have an A.J. Turner on the defensive side of the ball that's making plays. They have 9 pass deflections, 4 of them are the D line. So you got to keep their hands down. But that's where, you gotta kind of lay it out and be like, hey, we are a premier offense. We have the 2 best running backs. We have the best wide receiver in our eyes. And then we have the best receiving core in the country, not just one guy, it's the whole team. We need to show that. And I think this week is a great example or a great opportunity for us to do that.
And a really good point to you as well. Like, I know this isn't a Notre Dame show, but Notre Dame has to now prove to the country that they can hang with the big dogs. So they go up and they hang 66 on Purdue, right? Like, what happens if Ohio State does slip up, against Oregon or whatever late in the year? Guess what everyone's going to look back on? They're going to look back on how did you handle your non-conference, right? Okay, Ohio State's non-conference, maybe not great, but they put a hurt on all 3 of them, right? They took care of business. And so that's a really good point. How are they going to approach this? And maybe you're right. Maybe they do go 60-0 or 56-0 and pitch a shutout, look good on defense, and clean it up on offense. My pick's coming Saturday morning, so you have to hang on with bated breath for my selection. But always a good reminder, we're not a gambling show. Obviously, bet at your own cost and gamble responsibly. So, Kevin, a great preview for the game on Saturday. It's an important game and one that Ohio State, we're obviously preaching. Don't look ahead. They're not. This team's mature enough to not look ahead and really be locked in and channeled in on taking care of business and doing so in an impressive fashion. So, like I said, we'll be back Saturday morning. Kevin will not be. As you can see, he's in a new environment. He's going to be in a wedding on Saturday morning. Not his wedding. He's not good looking enough for that. So it won't be his wedding, but he won't be with us on Saturday morning. But I will be back for sure for a pregame on Saturday morning. And on our site, on our page, tons of content, all press conferences throughout the week on our YouTube channel. Ohio State on SI on YouTube, and then all sorts of written content covering Buckeyes across the spectrum: football, basketball, baseball. We're doing there's some women's basketball previews today that were up on the site. So anything Ohio State, get your fix over at si.com/college/Ohio State. We're happy to have you there. So as always, appreciate you jumping in with us. We'll be back Saturday morning prior to kick, and then we'll be back afterwards with all the post game, and you'll get my thoughts after Ohio State takes on Marshall down at the Horseshoe, 12 o'clock Saturday afternoon.